Welcome, seekers of the macabre, to another episode of Twisted Crime Tales. Tonight, I invite you to journey into a labyrinth of secrets, lies, and unspeakable tragedies, a tale so twisted that it defies the boundaries of what we call normal. Brace yourselves as we unravel the terrible case of Katie Pladl, a story where blood ties become a curse and love turns deadly. In the fading light of the mid-90s, a connection was forged on the fringes of the internet. Stephen Platt, a man barely out of his youth at 20, and Alyssa Garcia, a tender 15-year-old with the promise of life yet unrealized, found one another in a digital ether that promised connection but would deliver a lifetime of torment. Their meeting, both fateful and forbidden, led them to the sprawling city of Houston, Texas, a place where dreams collided with harsh reality. On January 29, 1998, as winter's chill embraced the land, Alyssa, only 17, gave birth to a daughter they named Denise. But instead of heralding hope, Denise's arrival ignited a maelstrom of chaos in an already crumbling union. From the very beginning, their home was marred by an air of desperation and cruelty. Stephen, plagued by a volatile temper, was accused by Alyssa of unspeakable acts that left Denise battered and broken. The rumors were as chilling as they were persistent. When little Denise cried, Stephen's method of silencing the anguish was to imprison her in the cold confines of a refrigerator until her cries subsided. It was a horror that hinted at an existence where love was replaced by violence and tenderness by terror. The couple, trapped by poverty and despair, eventually decided that they could not provide the sanctuary that a small life so desperately needed. With heavy hearts and an ominous sense of resignation, they agreed to place Denise for adoption. And so, Denise was taken from the broken arms of her birth parents and given to Anthony and Kelly Fusco, a couple from New York City, who would rename her Katie Fusco, giving her a new identity far removed from the pain of her past. In the vibrant tapestry of New York City, Katie grew up surrounded by art and color, a stark contrast to the dark legacy of her origins. Friends and family recalled her as an extraordinarily artistic soul. She expressed herself through paintings, sketches, and the soulful notes of her trumpet. Comics, in particular, were her escape, her way of painting a world where heroes triumphed over darkness. But as the years passed, the shadows of her unknown past began to whisper to her. Adopted though she was, Katie knew that her origins were a mystery, a secret kept just out of reach. When she completed high school and pursued studies in digital advertising, a new hunger emerged within her. A hunger not just for success, but for truth. The truth about where she came from, the truth about the family that had once been hers by blood. In 2016, at the tender age of 18, Katie made the fateful decision to peel back the layers of her identity. The internet, once a mere backdrop to her youth, now became her guide. With trembling fingers and a heart full of anticipation, she reached out to Alyssa Garcia. The response was swift, and the connection established what seemed to be a promising reunion. For Katie, the digital correspondence was a bridge between two disparate worlds, the safe, colorful realm of her adoptive family and the grim, troubled world of her biological parents. As the conversations deepened, Katie discovered more than she had ever imagined. Not only were Stephen Platt and Alyssa Garcia still together, but in the decade since her adoption, they had welcomed two more daughters into their troubled fold. The family had relocated to Virginia, a move that seemed to offer a fresh start. And yet, beneath this veneer of familial reunion, the currents of discontent and despair churned relentlessly. In August of that same year, Katie made a bold choice. Disregarding her plans for college, she left behind her comfortable life in New York and moved in with her biological family, determined to bridge the lost years and reclaim the fragments of her true self. Her adoptive parents, Anthony and Kelly Fusco, agreed with hesitant hearts. They saw this as a temporary reunion, a sabbatical year to reconnect with her origins, after which she would return to her studies and pursue her future. But fate, as it often does in twisted tales such as this, had other plans. The reunion, rather than mending fractured bonds, unleashed a torrent of forbidden desires and dangerous transformations. Upon Katie's arrival, the already fragile balance within her biological household began to shift. Alyssa and Stephen's marriage, already on the brink of collapse, was further destabilized. The couple had been living in separate rooms, their arguments echoing like a relentless drumbeat of despair. Now, with Katie's presence, an unsettling change began to take shape. Elisa noticed it first. Stephen's transformation was not merely physical, but deeply psychological. He began to cut his hair in a new style, shave his long-held beard, and embrace a regime of exercise. Changes that seemed designed to mask the scars of his past, or perhaps to craft a new identity. But it was not just his appearance that had altered. One fateful night, Elisa, rising to the bathroom, stumbled upon a scene that defied reason. She discovered Stephen sleeping in Katie's room. When confronted, he offered a chilling justification that his deep bond with his older daughter necessitated such closeness. The words were as cold as they were incomprehensible, a twisted explanation that sent shivers down Elisa's spine. In the months that followed, this perverse closeness escalated. The lines between familial affection and something far more sinister began to blur. Katie, caught in the throes of longing for connection, found herself ensnared in a relationship with the very man who was supposed to be her protector. A relationship that strayed into the realms of the and the taboo. By November 2016, the seeds of inevitable disaster had been sown, and Elisa and Stephen had decided to part ways formally, filing for divorce. Yet, in a cruel twist, custody arrangements dictated that Katie go to live with Stephen, further entrenching the dangerous proximity between father and daughter. It was during this period of legal and emotional fragmentation that Elisa, in a moment of desperate clarity, uncovered a page from Katie's diary, a page that revealed a horrifying truth. In her private musings, Katie had written that Stephen had commanded the family to regard her not as a sister, but as a stepmother. The revelation that she was pregnant with his child added a final, gut-wrenching blow. In that moment, the cold reality settled in. The man who was her biological father had crossed an unthinkable boundary, and the consequences of their twisted union were only just beginning to unfold. Despite the mounting evidence of their unholy alliance, Katie and Stephen's perverse romance culminated in a public declaration of love, a wedding on July 20th, 2017. In a social media photograph that captured the unnerving normalcy of the event, Katie's adoptive parents and Stephen's mother looked on, their expressions a mix of disbelief and resignation. For them, this union was a conundrum, a love that defied societal norms, an incestuous liaison wrapped in the guise of reconciliation. Katie, who had once been a hopeful artist, now found herself ensnared in a reality where love and manipulation wove together into an intricate, horrifying tapestry. Her adoptive parents, ever the protectors, chose to stand by her side, offering support in a bid to salvage what remained of her shattered world. They clung to the hope that perhaps this twisted relationship was but a temporary aberration, a dark detour in her life's journey. Yet as time would reveal, the darkness was not to be temporarily tamed. In September 2017, Katie gave birth to her first and only child with Stephen, a boy they named Bennett. This new life, an innocent soul born into a maelstrom of sin and sorrow, became the unwitting casualty of the family's unraveling. The fragile promise of redemption that a child might bring was drowned in the overwhelming tide of tragedy. As the months passed, the marriage between Katie and Stephen deteriorated further. Economic hardships compounded their personal demons, and the unstable relationship began to crack under the weight of guilt and resentment. The police, alerted by suspicions and prompted by Elisa's persistent complaints, eventually intervened. When questioned about their marriage, both Katie and Stephen claimed ignorance of any familial ties. Their differing surnames had once concealed the truth, but with further investigation, the horrific reality emerged. They were bound by blood, a fact that rendered their union a criminal act under the law. Though Stephen was briefly detained and released on bail with a non-contact order, the damage was done. Custody of baby Bennett was stripped from the couple and given to Stephen's mother, a temporary measure that could not erase the long shadow cast by their actions. In a desperate bid to reclaim control over her life and salvage what little remained of her sanity, Katie made a fateful decision in April 2018. Determined to end the unholy chapter that had consumed her, she resolved to divorce Stephen and fight for custody of her son. The decision was not made lightly. It was a final stand against the monstrous past that threatened to engulf her completely. Despite the existence of the non-contact order, Katie reached out to Stephen with a plea for closure. But the call she made that day ignited something dark within him, a malignant, uncontrollable fury. That fateful day, April 11th, 2018, would etch itself into the annals of twisted crime forever. Stephen's mother later recalled that the phone call had transformed him. His demeanor shifted from one of reluctant compliance to an almost palpable nervous intensity. With that, he set in motion a plan that would culminate in unspeakable horror. Disregarding any semblance of humanity, Stephen arrived at Katie's home under the guise of a familial visit. But what unfolded next was a nightmare from which there would be no awakening. Stephen, driven by a deranged determination, abducted baby Bennett. He retreated to his home, where he confined the innocent child for several agonizing hours before committing the unthinkable act of suffocation. The life of little Bennett, whose only crime was being born into a tainted legacy, was extinguished in a cold, calculating moment. His lifeless body was callously stowed away in a closet, a macabre testament to the depths of depravity that had taken hold of the man. But the nightmare did not end there. As fate would have it, Katie was in Connecticut at the time, visiting her adoptive grandmother, a fragile but cherished figure who had offered her a haven of warmth and kindness. Unbeknownst to Katie, Stephen had been watching her every move. Patient and predatory, he waited outside the home of her grandmother, his car idling like a beast lying in wait. When the moment presented itself, as Katie and her adoptive father, Anthony Fusco, emerged from the house, Stephen struck with deadly precision. From his vehicle, he opened fire. In a single horrifying sequence of events, he shot them both, Katie and Anthony, ending their lives almost instantaneously. The brutality of the act, the cold efficiency with which it was executed, sent shockwaves through the community and left behind a scene of desolation and despair. When the police arrived at the scene, they were met with the gruesome remnants of a family torn asunder. Neighbors recalled sightings of a car, matching the description of Stephen's vehicle, and soon his lifeless body was discovered, a grim echo of the destruction he had wrought. As the wheels of fate turned, Stephen's own life unraveled. Moments later, his broken form was discovered, a bullet lodged in his head, a final, tragic punctuation to a saga of despair and betrayal. 3 lives, a young woman, a devoted adoptive father, and the most innocent of all, a baby named Bennett, were snuffed out, their potential extinguished by the monstrous acts of a man consumed by madness. The case of Katie Pladl rippled far beyond the confines of a single family. It shocked the United States, ignited debates and polarized public opinion. For many, the relationship between Stephen and Katie was not only morally repugnant, but it also symbolized a failure of the institutions meant to protect the vulnerable, and a failure of society to recognize the warning signs of impending tragedy. Some voices in the aftermath questioned the very nature of blood ties, arguing that while biology cannot be denied, it does not inherently forge an emotional bond. Yet for the vast majority, over 90% of those who weighed in on the case, the union was an abomination, a violation of nature so severe that it demanded condemnation. Even among those who might have once entertained a more lenient view, the tragedy of Bennett's death and the senseless loss of life rendered any sympathy impossible. Stephen's family lawyer, in a twist that underscored the bizarre rationalizations sometimes invoked in such cases, claimed that Katie had arrived in Stephen's life at a time when he was at his lowest, a man drowning in his own self-loathing and despair. He argued with a disturbing nonchalance that the love that blossomed between them was as inexplicable as it was doomed. But for Eliza, for the shattered fragments of Katie's adoptive family, such justifications were a bitter pill to swallow, a testament to the cruelty of fate and the dark corners of the human heart. This is not a story confined to a dusty file in some forgotten corner of the criminal archives. It is a mirror held up to society, a reflection of our deepest fears, our most repressed desires, and the precarious balance between duty and desire. In the case of Katie Pladl, that balance was shattered, and the fragments of what once was now lie scattered across a landscape of sorrow and regret. Tonight, as we reflect on this twisted tale of betrayal, forbidden love, and tragic demise, I ask you to ponder the shadows that reside within us all. How far would one go to belong, and at what cost does that belonging come? The case of Katie Pladl is more than just a story. It is a chilling parable of broken promises, human frailty, and the dark secrets that can consume a life. If you found yourself gripped by the despair and horror of this case, if the cryptic murmur of its secrets still echoes in your mind, then I urge you to stay with us, hit that like button, subscribe, and join our community of truth seekers. What do you believe could have been done to halt this cascade of tragedy? And in your own life, what secrets lurk in the shadows waiting to be exposed? Remember, every family, every heart holds its own mysteries, and sometimes the most twisted truths are the ones hidden behind familiar smiles. Thank you for watching this episode of Twisted Crime Tales. Until our next descent into the unknown, stay curious, stay cautious, and never stop questioning the fragile veneer of normalcy. Good night, and beware the shadows.